ये अपना संजीवन है।
Hi friends, today let's turn towards one more interesting story from the textbook. That's the title of the story is The Last Lesson, which is written by the famous author Alfonso Daudet. Dear friends, here is the image of the author, Mr. Alfonso Daudet. So let's gather more information about the author, about his career, about his life, and about his contribution to the literary world. So let's have more information about the author. The author, Alfonso Daudet, born in the year 1840, Daudet joined army to fight in the Franco-Prussian War. France's defeat had a profound impact and reflected in his stories. Contes du Lundi, Monday Tales, a collection of stories published in 1873 in London and shows the change of France's fortune through the eyes of a young boy. He contributed to the literary world through his stories, to his novels, and varied writing collection of the stories. In the year 1897, he passed away after a very good contribution to the literary world. Dear friends, so let's understand the detailed explanation of the story, The Last Lesson by Alfonso Daudet. The narrator of the story is a young school going boy named Franz. That morning, he was scared as he was late for school. Also, as their teacher, Mr. Hamel, had announced the previous day that he would test them on the topic of participles, and Franz did not know anything at all. He was more scared of the being scolded. Franz had another option in his mind to miss the school and enjoy the day out in the warm and bright weather. He describes the scene. There were birds chirping on the trees, and the noise of the Prussian soldiers doing the drill behind sawmill could also be heard. The scene outside was more attractive than the school, but Franz controlled the temptation and to choose to attend the school. As a Franz walked fast to the town hall, he noticed a huge crowd at the notice board. The war with Prussia had begun 2.5 years ago, and since then, all the bad news, like losing the war, occupation of Alsace and Lorraine by the enemy, that is Prussia, etc., had been communicated to the people through the bulletin board, to the notice board, display board, which was placed in the circle at the center place of the town. Franz kept on walking towards the school and thought in his mind that what news could have been put up at the board now. When passing in front of the notice board from a square, so he was thinking what notice might be displayed on the notice board. As he walked hurriedly towards the school, the blacksmith, who was also reading the news, had come along with his training, called out to Franz from behind and said that he didn't go in such a hurry as there was a plenty of time for him to reach the school. Blacksmith interrupted Franz and he advised him not to move so fast, not to be in so hurry, as there was a plenty of time for him to reach to school. Franz thought that blacksmith was making fun of him as he was already late for school. When Franz reached the garden outside the school, he was out of a breath as he had walked very fast. Initially, Franz thought that blacksmith was making fun with him, and already he was in a hurry to reach to the school, so he didn't pay much attention, much notice to the blacksmith's suggestion and his intervene while he was moving to school early in the morning. Franz describes this, the usual scene at the school in the mornings, a lot of noise created by moving desks, children repeating their lessons, and a teacher striking the tables with the ruler could be heard. So, this is the normal expression or common description about the school proceeding and how the school usually carried away the routine. In the same way, here the description we can find out that day was unusual, as there was no such a sound coming out of the school, and it seemed that the school was closed as it used to be on Sunday morning. But that day was unusual, as there was no sound coming out of the school and out of the school classrooms. The school was looking just like a Sunday morning, just like it was a close, as it remained closed on Sunday. Franz had planned that he would take cover under the commotion and reach the class without being noticed, but he did not seem that possible. But that did not seem possible. Franz peeped inside his class. He reached the school and even near to his classroom, and he peeped inside. He saw inside and saw his classmates seated, and Mr. Hamel, their teacher, walking in class with a ruler made of iron plus under his arm. Franz feared a beating, and he saw inside. And when he saw inside, so he was scared. Mr. Hamel, his teacher, he was walking in the class keeping the iron ruler under his arm, and when he saw the scene, so he was scared, he was feared. And then he made courage and decided to get into the class. Franz was ashamed of being late and feared a scolding, as he had entered the class in front of everyone. So he was late, and that's why he was feeling ashamed to get inside into the class, and even he was feared of a scolding from the teacher, Mr. Hamel. So he had to enter the classroom in front of everyone. So that was his problem, and Franz found it strange, as Mr. Hamel did not say anything, and on the contrary, politely asked him to get to his seat as the class was about to begin without him. Then it was very surprising, it was very wonder to the Franz, because Mr. Hamel didn't scold, but on the other hand, they permitted Mr. Hamel permitted Franz to enter in the class, and he was very polite and politely asked him to get into his seat. So class was about to begin, and this was very surprising, and this was somewhat shocking. It was wondered to the Franz, because there was no any harsh behavior. There was no any scolding from Mr. Hamel, and he didn't get any punishment for being entering late in the class, or arriving late to the class. And on the other hand, or contrary, Mr. Hamel politely asked him to get to his seat. So everything, it was a little bit surprising to the Franz. Franz hurried to sit, to acquire his seat and to get his seat. After some time, when he overcame the scare and became comfortable, he noticed that their teacher had worn his best embroidery that day. The teacher normally wore it on the occasion like inspection, prize distribution days. Franz wondered if that day was a normal day, then what could be the reason for Mr. Hamel to wear his special dress. Then, when he overcame the fear and the scare and become comfortable, then Franz looked here and there in the class, and then he found some changes. He found some of the very uncommon things that day happening. The teacher normally wore the okay very simple dress, but on that day he had worn embroidered dress. So usually he used to wear that embroidered dress on the day of inspection, on the day of prize distribution day. But that was a very ordinary day, and yet Mr. Hamill had worn his best embroidered dress that day. So that was very special dress to the Mr. Hamill, and usually on the selected day he used to wear. So that was little surprising and shocking to the Franz. So he was wondered and he was thinking about that the different things or strange things he was experiencing, and he was witness. They all looked sad, all the people. Okay, so they were looking very sad. Hauser had brought his reader, which was old and torn. He had opened it, kept it on his knees, and had placed his spectacles on it. In the class, uh, some villagers were also present, because usually they were not coming to in the class, and yet but that day they were seen inside. Some villagers, okay, they were present in the class. So even some old people were also there, some senior, okay, village people were also there, and they were looking very sad. All looked very sad. Hauser, one village man, middle-aged person, he had brought his reader textbook, which was very old and torn. He had opened and kept it on his knees, and had placed spectacles on it. Franz was confused and could not figure out what was happening that day. So Franz was little confused, and he could not figure out what was happening that day. He could not okay guess what was the special day. Just then Mr. Hamel told them that it was their last lesson in French, as the Prussians in Berlin had ordered that the French language would no longer be taught in the schools of Alsace and Lorraine, and that German language be taught instead. The German teacher would arrive the next day, and as this was the last lesson in French, he wanted them to pay attention. And then Mr. Hamel announced in the class that there was an order, and the German government had sent a order that French teaching of French should stop, and instead in the locality of Alsace and Touraine, in the schools of Alsace and Lorraine, German language should be taught instead of French language. And the order had come from Berlin. So that day, it could be the last lesson in the French language. So that's why he appealed to the students to pay attention and to be cautious and to be much careful, because it would be the last lesson in the French language. So Mr. Hamel appealed that he wanted them to pay attention. Franz was shocked to know that he could not learn French any longer, and now he knew the latest news that he had put up at the bulletin board of the town hall. And then Franz was shocked to understand all what was happening, and then he understood what might be displayed on the notice board in the village, in the town, uh, in the on the bulletin board of the town hall. So he understood that when he was coming to the school, why people had gathered in front of a bulletin board, notice board of the town hall, and what notice might be displayed on the put up on that bulletin board of the town hall. Now, one by one, Franz started understanding the proceedings and what was happening around there. Franz regretted for not being serious towards the studies and for wasting his time in hunting birds, eggs, and playing in the Sar River. And now he was regretted that he couldn't concentrate over his studies and didn't pay attention in learning French language, and he passed his time in a funny way, and he wasted his time in a playing. So he was regretted for not paying much attention, for not concentrating or learning French language. Till now, Franz considered his books to be an unwanted burden, but suddenly he starts considering them to be his best friends whom he could never leave. Up to now, Franz was considering his study material, his books, as a unwanted burden, as a load. But suddenly, he started considering them as his best friends. The textbook in the French language, he considered as his a good friend, as his best friend whom he could never leave. The writer wants to show the change in France's attitude. Here, writer is showing the change in okay, in France's attitude and towards study after hearing the news that he could learn French any longer. So he could not learn French language thereafter. So that was his concern. That was his prime okay care. That was his prime concern. The news that their teacher, Mr. Hamel, was leaving also had a similar impact on him. So the students and the villagers, they started talking that Mr. Hamel was leaving also had a similar impact. So that was also somewhat serious news. That was somewhat also cautious news to the Franz. Franz did not want him to go away. He no longer thought the teacher to be short-tempered and strict. So Franz did not want that Mr. Hamel should go away. Now, for him, he was not short-tempered and strict. So that was a little surprising and very shocking to the Franz. Now, Franz knew that Mr. Hamel was wearing his best dress in honor of his last lesson. And now Franz understood that why Mr. Hamel was wearing his best embroidered dress on that day, because he was wearing to honor to his last lesson, honor to the French language. He also realized that the village men had come to pay respect and thank Mr. Hamel for his service for 40 years in that school. So since the last 40 years, he was serving in that school, and he was teaching French language with proud and with respect. And even villagers had a lot of respect for the teacher, Mr. Hamel, because uh, since 40 years he was dealing, he was offering his services in the school. So maximum villagers had come to pay respect, to pay honor to the Mr. Hamel, as it was the last day in the French language, for the teaching of French language, learning of French language, and it was the last day to the Mr. Hamel also, because from next day he would have moved some other place, he would have gone. So that's why villagers had come to pay respect and to pay honor to Mr. Hamel and for his long services to the school and to the students of the village.